My guest today is Shannon Ashley. Shannon is a prolific writer. You can find her work on Medium as well as other outlets. She writes about life and love and wellness and relationships and so many different things. And I'm so excited to have you on the show today, Shannon. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so first things first. Um, you are a really good writer, like a really good writer. I like to
Thank you. That's
write.
kind.
No, you're like a really good writer. So I have been thinking about your writing, and I have a couple of questions for you that we're just going to get out of the way. So on the topic of how one becomes such a good writer, I have a short list of possibilities. We're just going to run through these. First of all, are you a witch?
No,
Not a witch.
not
Okay.
a witch.
All right, gonna cross that off. Is there a particular type of supplement that you take?
No, I'm not good at routines, so I can't remember to take
No,
anything every day.
no supplements.
Nope.
Okay, gonna cross that one off. Um, did you allow Satan to sharpen your pencil while standing at a crossroads on a moonless night in rural Mississippi?
That's a good question. I don't
Ah,
think so. Don't think so though.
but possibly a memory
But
gap where
I
that could have
mean,
happened.
because Satan can, right? Satan's tricky, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know, but probably not. I don't think
Okay.
I've been in Mississippi.
Okay, well, shoot, that was my short list. How do you become such an awesome writer? Then we must know.
Honestly, when people ask things like that, I have to say the answer isn't super great. It's more like desperation. I'm a single mom and I want to support my daughter. I want to have a career that I love and makes me wake up, with a purpose and with a
Yeah,
mission. I don't want to, just clock 40 hours or more in a job that takes and drains from me. I want to feel like I'm energized by my work. So for
hmm,
writing, it's that type of thing that just the more that I do it, the more I feel like it feeds my soul.
yeah, okay. Well, I mean, there are so many things here to unpack, and that's honestly one of some of the things that I wanted to talk with you about because I think, first of all, um, like it is hard to make a stable living as a creative person, as a writer that's doing the kind of stuff that you're doing, which is really writing about, it seems like at least, things that interest you and that it's very personal, but also creative. I mean, you're not like, I don't know, maybe you have side gigs, but like from what it seems online anyway, you're not doing like ad copy and you, promotional writing. Like you're writing for yourself. And like there are so many people probably listening to this right now who are like, I would like to be able to do something with my writing or my photography or my whatever. I mean, did what was the progression of this? Maybe we could start there.
You know,
How did this
for
come to be?
me,
Mm-hmm.
the dream for a long time was doing something creative with my life, but I never knew what that would look like
Mm-hmm.
because it's just I think a lot of creative people find themselves lost in that whole like I like to write, I like to draw, I like to do these things, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't know how it's going to like be monetized and mean anything.
Yeah.
So I just spent a lot of time, working to make money and just survive. And when I had my daughter, I was faced with um, that whole question of like, what am I going to do with my life? I knew I didn't want to put her in daycare. I wanted to, spend at least those first 3 years being
Yeah.
with her and developing that bond.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to me, the only answer would be working at home and doing something that I love to do. I didn't immediately do that though, because I didn't know what I was doing and I was pretty scared. So I actually just started with social media work.
Mm-hmm.
I was a writer for a company, just like contract work, and I wrote blogs for other businesses and
Mm-hmm.
Facebook posts and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's how I started, like kind of got
Mm-hmm.
my foot in the door. And for a long time, I did that for about 4 years, and I felt kind of like ashamed. I didn't enjoy the work as
Oh.
much as I had hoped I was going to.
Mm-hmm.
The pay wasn't very good, so I found myself, kind of rushing to get it done, and then
Sure.
I was unhappy with the results. And I kind of had this like feeling that if I can't ever do, writing that I want to do, like writing that comes from my heart, I felt like I'd never be a real writer. But I also never felt like I had time to do my own writing.
Mm-hmm.
So actually what happened for me was that the business, they started to give me less work,
Mm-hmm.
and I started to panic. And it was kind of like this 6 month long thing where I was trying to figure out, and I was worried. And every month I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make enough money to pay the bills,
That's
and I don't know what
stressful.
other type of it is. And it's one thing when it's just you, but when you have a kid, it's completely different.
Totally.
So I was really nervous, and I had heard about Medium. I noticed some people writing, and I'd heard that they had started paying for your work. And I just thought, like, I'm just going to have to try this and see if,
Wow.
I can make a living, or at least supplement the income that I was losing by having fewer clients with my other job.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I honestly, I threw myself into it, and I say that it was desperation
Mm.
because I just couldn't see anything else working for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I went all in. I started in April 25th, 2018 is when I first started publishing on
Wow.
Medium.
Mm-hmm.
And then that December, I told my workplace that I couldn't work for them anymore, and I needed them to assign my clients to other
Mm-hmm.
writers. And I just went full time with Medium. So now it's been a year of doing, or a little more than a year now of being full time with Medium,
Wow.
which it's scary, it's wonderful, and it's amazing, but it's definitely still scary because I'm never really sure like if it will, keep working. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm
Yeah.
probably going to keep doing it for as long as it's working. And then if it's ever not working, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and you might have a couple books in you too, Shannon.
Yeah,
I'm just, yeah.
I do think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think when the time is right. One
Mm-hmm.
of the hardest things for me has been pinpointing, like, well, what type of book,
Yeah.
do I really want to go with? But I do see all of the writing on Medium as like, hey, this is good practice anyway to help me like hone my voice and figure out what I do want
Yeah.
to write about in the future.
Definitely. Now, and you may not have had this experience because I mean, being like so talented, maybe you didn't have that, but I know with some creative people who are making their art and trying to get in with a place like Medium or another outlet that fits their particular art form. Did you have to go through a period where you were getting rejected, or were they like weren't responding to you, or did you get in touch with them and they were like, oh, what? Hello? Like, did they pounce right away, or did you have to grapple with any like try again, don't give up kind of thing?
You know what? It's funny because Medium allows you to publish, like anybody can publish.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have that like frontline
Mm-hmm.
rejection that writers usually have to deal with. At the time that I was starting to write for Medium, I did have other rejection. Like there
Mm-hmm.
were other, like I tried to pitch stories to magazines,
Mm-hmm.
and I tried to apply for even just like a volunteer blogging position for a Chattanooga moms blog, and like they gave me rejection. So there was
Yeah,
just like
the
all this.
Chattanooga Moms blog is possibly coping with some very serious regret right now, but their
I don't
loss.
know,
Yeah.
but yeah, I had to. It was one of those moments where I was like, okay, I have to start looking, like flipping everything for the positive.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, if these opportunities aren't for me, it could be that there's better opportunities out there.
What a great,
Start looking at it that way.
and that is what came to pass, honestly, and
Hmm.
that's such an important cognitive skill, because I see that as like really just beating down a lot of creative people, because like you're sort of offering this precious thing that you're like, this is what my heart knit together out of blood and tears, and somebody would be like, no thanks, and like slaps it down, and to keep doing that over and over again until you find your place. I mean, that takes a lot of emotional fortitude sometimes. And
It
so
does.
yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, that's probably one of the things that kept me focused on Medium as
Hmm.
opposed to all of these other angles that I could go through.
Yeah.
I thought, no, here's a place where if I just build a following here, I think
Hmm.
there will be results later down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Well, thank you for sharing that story.
Sure.
I mean, that's just, it's such an interesting experience that you've had. So I appreciate you sharing that with our listeners. Um, and that's actually how I became aware of you and your work, is that I saw a story on Medium, and the one that caught my eye was one that you wrote in a very just personal and authentic way about your experience of not just being in a toxic relationship, but like the personal growth and kind of evolution that allowed you to ultimately extract yourself from that toxic
Mhm.
relationship. But you wrote about it in a way that seemed really important to me, because I think a lot of people write about this subject as like once they're out of it, it's like, that was a horrible decision, I don't know what I was thinking. But you wrote about it, which in the way that it's very true of how much of a struggle it was to first kind of understand what was going on, and then kind of like work through it. And I don't know if you're familiar with my work at all, but this is a real like passion of mine, because I wrote a book about like the addictive nature of relationships, and particularly around like breakup recovery, and how it's so hard, I think, for people to move past unwanted relationship loss. But a big piece of that though is like how we really do get addicted, and sometimes it can be a very healthy positive thing if it's like a loving good relationship, but there's a real dark side of that. And I reached out to you to be on the podcast, hoping that we could talk a little bit more about that experience in particular. But I also want to
Yeah.
be sensitive to it, because I mean, I know that you've written about it publicly, but it's also probably a very I would imagine, I mean, a challenging subject, you know. But also one that I know a lot of my listeners really struggle with, and that's why I was hoping to talk with you about it, is just to kind of have that insider's perspective on what, not just what it's like, but what's really involved in like growing out of it, you
Mm.
know.
It's
So
layered, right? There's so many
mhm.
different layers to realizing how did I get into this type of situation in the
Yeah.
first place and then trying to get out of it. And
Hmm.
I lately there's a lot of talk about like narcissistic personalities in
Hmm.
toxic relationships. It's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of like, such like a buzzword right now. But
Hmm.
I do feel like a lot of things we're not talking about like how we got there. And I know for myself, like I was equally toxic in the relationship, and I didn't even understand the things that I was doing, that
Mm.
I wasn't going to have a healthy relationship, like as long as I was continuing in my own toxic behavior too.
Hmm. That is such a good point. I want to talk more about that, because I think that that is like a really a growth area for a lot of people. Maybe we could start, if it's okay, and like high
Mhm.
level. We do not have to get into all of the
Sure.
details. And if somebody would like to read more of the details, you can find all of Shannon's work on medium.com. So we'll point you in that direction. But like, the 2 minute version just the story of this relationship, because I think a lot of people listening to this can relate to what you lived through. I know I could when I
Sure.
read it. Yeah, I'm not without having dipped a toe into this particular pool. So how
Sure.
was the story for you?
Well, in this case,
Mm-hmm.
back in 2013, I got into a relationship that began online. There was another writer on Facebook who began pursuing me,
Mm-hmm.
and pretty quickly I found out that they were married, but they were pursuing me romantically.
Mm.
And it was very shocking for me that I didn't just run away, because I knew, like, obviously, like, married man, run away.
Well, intellectually, yeah, but that's
Yes.
not what we actually do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No. Yeah, because I didn't understand, like, just from the beginning. It was all the red flags.
Mm-hmm.
I fell very quickly into this relationship that felt like so good so soon, right away, like everything, the type of
Mm-hmm.
feelings I had always wanted in a relationship, all of those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And that was its own sort of desperation, where I felt like, if I don't, like, go down this path, like, I'll regret it forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did, and it wasn't even, it's funny because it wasn't even a long relationship. We had the online portion of it for a few months. We finally met in May
Mm-hmm.
of 2013. He left his wife a week later. We
Mm.
moved in together about a week later.
Yeah.
Um, I left my whole life in Minnesota to go down to Tennessee with him.
Mm-hmm.
And his whole thing, he didn't want to be alone when he went through his divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Big red
Yeah.
flag, but
Mm.
I thought it was love. And we lived together for 6 months. I got pregnant and found out that he was really cheating the whole time.
On
Of course.
you.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Because
Yeah.
he was a chronic cheater.
Mm-hmm.
He'd had many affairs throughout his marriage. Um, that was kind of his coping mechanism
Mm-hmm.
with his own issues,
Yeah.
and it was such a low point in my life, because it was like that realization that I love somebody so much despite how badly they treated me. And I knew,
Mm-hmm.
like you say, on an intellectual level, like, this is not
Mm-hmm.
good.
Yeah.
But there was that heart level that, like, did not want to, like, give up,
Yeah.
or it felt like I've made so many bad decisions to be here. Like, how do I get out now? It
Right.
was it was terrible. And he left me in November of
Mm-hmm.
2013, and I became very suicidal. I just
Mm.
thought my life was over.
Sure.
I couldn't I couldn't grapple with the idea of being a single mother.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want any part of it.
Yeah.
I I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. But he and I maintained a very, like, blurred line relationship
As
after the
many
breakup.
people do. Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so confusing too,
Yeah.
because here I am, I'm having his baby, and he's looking for new partners, but then he's coming back with all of these, like, comments that, well, our story isn't really over, and like, these, like, breadcrumbs that, well, maybe
Mm-hmm.
if I got myself together, we would be back together.
Yeah.
And I was just, like, trapped in this really weird place of thought, as if I needed him.
Mm-hmm.
And mm, after my daughter was born, it's just, he wasn't, the type of father that I would have, wanted for my
Yeah.
daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that, oh, he's this terrible person, but just, we have different parenting styles and
Mm-hmm.
philosophies, and he's not going to be as engaged as I would, want her
Mm-hmm.
father to be. And it took a good 2 years probably for me to finally, like, kind of snap out of it and
Yeah.
realize that, like,
Mm-hmm.
I have to have, like, better boundaries, and, like, get out, so that we don't stay in this ridiculous,
Mm-hmm.
labelist type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for me, it was, I've written about the way I finally got out of the relationship. It's
Mm-hmm.
probably controversial because I didn't know how to do it. because
Yeah.
I felt like I had no willpower. And
That's
it was
the
terrible because it was like the
addictive
addiction.
thing.
And we would fight every day, and it was so traumatic. But I'd come back for more. And I started to be like open about what he was saying to me. I emailed his girlfriend, like showed her screenshots of our
Yeah.
conversations. I emailed his mother and shared the screenshots with her, because he had this
Yeah.
whole narrative that I was the crazy baby mama who was
Right.
still in love with him, and I was like trying to use his daughter against him. But I had all of these messages showing that he was just as much like continuing the blurry
Mhm.
relationship and the sexual everything,
Yeah.
and that he wasn't being
Mhm.
honest about what was happening.
Mhm.
And that was the first step, because it made him hate me for a while,
Mhm.
because everyone then,
Yeah,
like,
you
or at
blew it
least the
up.
people
Mhm.
closest to him, like, saw that he was lying, and
Right.
he was like, "You are, the meanest person in the world. I can't forgive you for this." And it wasn't enough to get, like, completely free, but it was enough to just, like,
Yeah,
get some
d
distance
I could
and
see
some
that.
breathing space.
Mhm.
After a while, he forgave me, like, things kind of, like,
Mhm.
fell back into a cycle again where we started to get sexual again. He came out as, like, polyamorous,
Mm.
and that, became this whole new thing in his life. And it was it was easier, though, to finally disengage from that part of the relationship. I think because I'd done, like, that first part, and I
Mhm.
realized that I can live a life without him.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when things started to get, back there again, I was able to focus on whatever was going on with our daughter.
Mhm.
And I started to look at the way that he wasn't really interacting with her as I would hope.
Mhm.
And she was going through issues with a tongue tie surgery, and I
Mm.
had to put her into speech and occupational therapy.
Mhm.
And I talked to him about it, and I just felt like the engagement from him in response was just, like, not there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that helped me, like,
Mhm.
finally kind of like, okay, this person, like, we are never going to be on the same page.
Mhm.
And it was interesting because I quit engaging with him. There were a few blips after that, like, he got a new girlfriend and wound up getting remarried, and there were a few
Mhm.
times where there were, like, these big epic fights between all of us
Mhm.
when I tried to, say something about, like, "I wish that you were more involved," or something.
Mhm.
But then it's like I finally learned how to detach and like, quit coming back for more.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of like I learned after all that time what's going to start a fight. Even if it shouldn't start a fight, there are things, if I say something, it's gonna start a fight. And I
Mhm.
learned to, like, quit going back there. And now, I take
Mhm.
care of my daughter, and he and I interact on a very minimal basis. But when we do, it feels like professional.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about it going into, some weird place that's going to mess with my head.
What a
I feel
relief.
happy, like, I
Yeah.
no longer have to, like, feel that single motherhood is the worst
Mhm.
thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but it's been such a layered journey, just realizing these different realities of life. It's not what I thought.
No, but that's, I mean, just thank you on behalf, and I'm sure that you probably hear this from your readers all the time, but as I was reading the story that you wrote about this, I was just thinking, what a courageous person, and also that you're such a just wonderful writer, that you're able to articulate like all of these experiences in such a way that I think people can really not just understand but relate to them, because I think that through your work you were really able to give a voice to a life experience that a lot of people have, and that while they're going through it, it is just so hard and so consuming. But then after they go through it and come out the other side, I think they often feel so like ashamed of what has happened that they do not. It's like, we're gonna put that in a box, and then the lid, and then the chains around the box, and then we're gonna bury it, and then we're gonna pour concrete on it. And it's like, even though it was profoundly traumatizing, and I think still does impact them for a long time, it's like, we're not, they can't talk about it. It's so hard. And so just
Oh
thank
yeah.
you for being able to shine a light on a life experience that is common, it's devastating, and it is not discussed. It really isn't. Yeah.
And it's funny because I think when we talk about it, you realize that there's actually a lot of freedom
Mm-hmm.
in talking about the things that you think you're not supposed to talk about.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
you get that distance and you get clarity that you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
get if you keep it all in that box.
Yeah. That is good advice. You're saying, even though you, for somebody listening, like you feel like you need to not talk about it, that's almost like exactly the opposite. You do need to talk about it, and come to terms with what happened and share your story. So there are so many different layers here in what you recounted. And I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you, because like even on our website at growingself.com, like on our blog posts and things, like people will comment or leave questions or something. And like, and I try to address all of the questions to the degree that
Sure.
I can. And I actually, I have one for you for a little bit later.
Sure.
But that is one of the topics that just comes up over and over and over again. And I think it's because people, when they're going through this experience, it's like all they can think about, and they're just trying to like find answers and find something that they can hold on to, and make sense of what's happened. So I know there's going to be a lot of interest in this. The very first thing in your story that really stood out to me, that I think we should talk about, and that people need to have in their minds a little bit more, is that you said when you first started interacting with this person, that it was a ton of chemistry, that it just like created these huge feelings in you that you hadn't had before. And it felt extremely special, but like intense. And it also moved really fast. And I heard you say, as you were telling the story, like in retrospect, those were red flags, but we need to talk about this, because I think that,
Mhm.
I would say most people, when they're having this experience, they're like, oh, I found the one. This is what love feels like. Like, because we hear about like these ideas of romantic love and being swept off your feet. And when people experience this, they think, it's finally happening to me. And it is not a thought in their head that this experience is actually not normal, and it is a warning sign. It is something to run away from, as opposed to something to move towards. But that is not the idea in our culture. We believe in, love
It's
at first
so
sight,
bad,
and
but
it's
yes,
so
all the
bad.
romantic narratives are just,
I
you don't
know.
realize how much you believe them. On a surface level, like we laugh and we say that that's all, that's not true. But it's so deeply ingrained in our culture
Yeah.
that
And
you
it's so
end up living it out.
completely. And it's so powerful when you're living it. I
Mhm.
mean, so like at the
Oh, yeah.
time when you were having this like, like huge emotional experience, I'm like, what were you telling yourself about that at the time? And what, like, with the benefit of hindsight, have you come to learn about what that actually was?
One moment that really stands out to me,
Mm-hmm.
it was a weekend after he left his wife and he drove up to Minnesota to spend the weekend with me. And
Mm-hmm.
then we decided that I would move down with him. It was a last minute choice. So I was going to leave my apartment. I was leaving like everything behind to do this. And I was locking the door, and I was thinking to myself, like, this will either be very good or very bad. like because I knew like it was
Yeah.
such a drastic choice, but I was looking at it like it was my chance to be happy, like
Mm-hmm.
at 32 years old or 31 years old, this is my last chance for happiness and I'm
Yeah.
not going to miss out on it. That was
Mm-hmm.
a really big thing for me throughout the whole relationship. There was
Mm-hmm.
just that fear that if I
Mm.
didn't do it, I would lose this person and I would, never have that love again.
Okay. That is an amazing and important insight, but is like to be aware of the story that you're telling yourself about what is happening, what it means, and like what's going on inside of you that might be allowing you to override some of these, like, wait a minute, is this really a good idea? This guy is leaving his wife. What's happening? Like, because I bet that that was going on too. And but that's like again, that intellectual level. And when it comes to those very deep things, either that intense like obsessive romantic infatuation feeling or that fear, your intellectual mind is like shouting into a hurricane. It does not matter at all.
It's crazy, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, because you don't think you could ever be that person. You hear all the stories of, someone else, and
Mhm.
you think, oh, that I would never. That's obvious. Like, I would never fall for that.
No, but that's not true. That is not how
Mhm.
people work. Everybody. I mean, so many people that it's very easy to like sit
Mhm.
on the sidelines and think, oh, I would never do that. But until you have that experience and you feel those feelings, we are all vulnerable. Really. Yeah. So, so then beyond like the circumstance and that first warning sign that of narcissists are just like you're getting involved in an unhealthy relationship is that it's fast, it's intense, it's that like love bombing kind of thing. Like, was it the whole typical narcissist, like you're the most amazing person in the world and like making you feel super special and important kind of thing right off the bat?
It it was,
Mm-hmm.
like, and in some ways, like, I hate saying that just because, like, I'm not trying to, demonize this person,
Oh,
but,
yeah, no,
it's like, I think that a lot of these people, they don't even, like, realize that they're doing it because they're, like, acting out their own trauma,
oh,
and they don't,
completely.
like,
Yes.
I can see some of the things, like, now, and I've
Mm-hmm.
witnessed, some of his other relationships, and I'll see
Yeah.
myself in the other person, and I'm just like,
Mm.
you know,
Don't do it.
don't
Right.
do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because it
Well,
was, yeah,
mhm.
lots of love bombing.
Yeah. But you also bring up an excellent point that it's also easy to um, label or demonize people who have this way of relating to others. And I'm so glad that you brought up the fact that it is coming from a place of their own life experiences and their own trauma. And we do not need to be mad at these people. We do not need to hate them but to recognize it for what it
Yeah,
is. You know what I mean? Yeah.
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 Don't go into it if you can help it.
Well, yeah. But then so then say our listener has not known in advance what we're talking about like warning signs of a possibly unhealthy relationship and is now getting in. I mean, so further down the line, like after you guys moved in together, and um what were some of the next things that you began to experience that in retrospect were really red flags that maybe at the time that you were kind of so deeply in,
Mhm.
it was difficult to take influence from them? But for somebody living it, what might they be going through that?
There were a few things. Um, Now, this was a person who got married, like, right out of high school,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was about a 10 or 11-year marriage. They had 3 kids very young, and he hadn't, lived his own life.
Yeah.
So there were points where it was clear that he wanted, to experience life on his own. We
Mm-hmm.
went out to dinner with a friend one time, and our friend had just come back from, like a monastery. He's a single guy, and he's free to, have these different life experiences. And my boyfriend, or soon to be fiance at the time, was talking about how, like, oh, I'd really like to go, do that. And I'm thinking how, you're a father, like, you
Yeah.
have this new relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember, I may have been pregnant at the time, but I was thinking, like, the fact that he was so earnestly, like, thinking that he could just go off and live
Yeah.
this, this different life, like a
Mm-hmm.
single person, that was kind of a a weird moment for me, because I was like, doesn't
Yeah.
he realize, like, what is going on?
But that's another really good warning sign that I think people can overlook. And what you are seeing were sort of just like patterns of self-absorption, or like whatever he needed or wanted in that moment was more important than maybe his obligations or commitments to other people.
Yeah.
And that was a pattern that you could see. And I think that that's also an important one to be aware of, and particularly, um, you know, and I say this without, I mean, any kind of judgment, because I mean, I too have been in situations where we overlook these things. But when cheating is happening, many times the person who is like the affair partner um, really believes that they are different, and that what that relationship is special and better, and maybe it feels that way. But that, after the fact, what we can see is kind of just patterns in the way of relating. It's that, and I think this played out in your story. It's like, if somebody did that to their wife and their kids, that's going to happen to me and my kid. And this like stream of relationships beyond that is that, a wonderful way of understanding who people really are is to pay attention to what they do.
Hmm.
Is that
Yes,
kind of what you
for
saw
sure.
there? Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of things. He had a tendency to stay in touch with his exes,
Mm-hmm.
which I know
Yeah.
that's controversial. Some people are like, oh, that's fine. But,
I don't think it's a
if
good
you're a
idea.
chronic cheater, probably not the best idea,
Yeah, probably not.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, no, there were so many red flags,
Yeah.
and I kept overlooking them. Even when they bothered me, I kept overlooking them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do when you're addicted, apparently. That's um
Yeah.
he he was driving me down, to Tennessee, and he was calling ex-girlfriends to tell them that he'd finally left his wife. And I'm right there, and I'm thinking, like, why is this necessary? But it was such a big deal that he'd finally left his wife after all these years of, women wanting him to finally do it. He was
Mm-hmm.
finally doing it.
Yeah.
And, the whole, like, special part for me was that, like, well, I got to be the one who was there. But, you know,
Yeah.
in the
Right.
long run, it just felt like being used. I was the one who was there.
Yeah. I totally get that. And let's talk about why that part makes more sense too,
Yeah.
because you use that um addiction word, and people who've listened to this podcast have heard me talk about this before, but we know, I mean, just like there's a biological basis for our developing very strong attachment bonds to other people. It's how human beings work. We can become bonded to substances, and we can also become bonded to people. And what we know is that the more anxiety provoking and in many ways unhealthy a relationship is, the bigger the highs and lows, and the more that hook kind of gets sunk in, right? And so I think what you're describing is really similar. I mean, somebody who is addicted to drugs or alcohol, like intellectually will know. it is not a good idea for me to be
Yes.
using heroin and getting my children taken away by social services. Like, all of
Mhm.
this is known, but there's this pull, this bond that is so deeply ingrained. It's difficult to do otherwise. And I know, I mean, I had a terrible experience that I wrote about in the Exaholics book, where it was also very much like that. I mean, against my better judgment and rational mind, continued to engage with someone in a way that was not good for me at all.
Mhm.
Um, but it's difficult, I think, to communicate what that is like, that drive to maintain that connection that is more important than your good judgment, than your self-esteem, than your, you know, are you able to put that into words? Like,
That's a good question. And I think that's something I still struggle with
yeah,
because I can still feel that need. Like I can still remember
mm-hmm,
what it felt like
yeah,
to feel like if we didn't speak every day, it was, the end of the world.
right.
We had a friend who even intervened after our breakup, and she tried to, kind of counsel a little bit and get us to respond a little bit healthier to each other. And
Mm-hmm,
she would suggest things like, why don't you have a separation of time where you don't speak to each other for
mm-hmm,
a month, or
mm-hmm,
things like this. And we both had a horrible time with it.
right.
It was, and maybe that's the thing too, because it wasn't even just me who had the problem, but he had the problem too. Like
Mm-hmm.
he couldn't let go. And
Yeah.
it was different for him because he was out, living his life. He, very quickly moved in with someone new
Mm-hmm.
and was having, all of this fun while I was like facing pregnancy and freaking
Mm.
out.
Jeez.
But he still, couldn't let go even when we would say, we're not going to talk for this next month. He'd
Mm-hmm.
still call me at like 2 a.m.
Right.
complaining. He thought he was, going to have a heart attack and was so stressed out from
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and, all
Mm-hmm.
of these things. And I'm like, why aren't you talking to your girlfriend? And then
Mm-hmm.
also like, why wasn't I just hanging up the phone? It's,
But
yeah.
but it makes so much sense when we look at it through that lens of bonding,
Mhm.
that it's such like a primal need, is to feel safe and to feel connected and to feel important. And in those
Mhm.
moments, even though both of you probably knew that it wasn't a great idea, that those needs were being met, and to have those
Mhm.
bonds broken, um, the experience of like withdrawal, or those attachment bonds being broken,
Yeah.
it feels like really the end of the world. It
Yes,
feels
it
like this
does.
existential thing, akin to death in some ways. And there's an evolutionary basis for that. That's how people were built. But in the context of a toxic relationship, that works against you, and
Yes.
makes it very difficult to break away, even when you know objectively that you probably should. Yeah, yeah. Good. I'm glad we're talking about it in these terms, because I think
Mhm.
that those are the moments that after the fact people feel bad about. Like, I know that when I went through my terrible experience, after the fact, it wasn't even that I had been betrayed or lied to or had bad things done to me. It was that I failed to protect myself from
Yes.
something that I knew was not good for me. That took
Mhm.
me a long time to get through. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah,
that's
I
what we
can relate
do.
to that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think I spent a very long time just feeling worthless after
Yeah.
that,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like, well, what will I ever be good for now?
Right. Right.
And there's kind of that like label that you give yourself. And, it didn't matter what people said about me once I started talking about it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they would say, "Oh, you don't have integrity, or you're a homewrecker," all of these things. And they don't even get it. Like I've been through all of those already,
Right.
calling myself stupid, calling myself
Mm-hmm.
trash, you go through that. And it's true. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's it's tempting to just kind of punish yourself
Mm-hmm.
for your own bad judgment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, And I think that that's really why so many people need like support on the other
Mhm.
side of this, because it's really a traumatic experience on so many levels.
Mhm.
Um, but again, and so, say somebody's listening to this who might be in this type of situation. There's a relationship that is not good for them. They know it's not good for them. Um, you described a little bit, when we were talking about the arc of your story, that one thing was that your values around being a parent and being bonded to your daughter,
Mhm.
and having her needs be so important, like that was certainly one piece of this. And like, um, values that maybe shifted around what kind of parenting experience you would like her to have. That it sounds like was one piece of what helped you kind of begin to break away. And I don't know if it was any one thing, but kind of looking back, was there sort of a turning point that allowed you to be like, wait just a darn minute here, and blow the lid off that thing, because like you're participating in it for a while to maintain
Mhm.
that bond, but then it got to a point where you're like, no, I'm telling your mom, I'm telling your girlfriend, I'm telling everybody. And it was like that, just like burn the place down kind of to escape sort of thing. Like, but what allowed you to do that?
In that case, I, uh, I was very dependent upon him.
Mm-hmm.
I had just had the baby. She was not more than 3 months old, and I was living in our old apartment,
Mm-hmm.
and he was living with his new girlfriend, and our lease was up. So I was going to have to move, and I didn't know where I was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he had decided that he would put money aside for child support, and then that could be used for me to rent a place.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was looking for places for me to rent, and he was just like renting these rooms with strangers and just
Oh,
all these like just
geez.
like
Yeah,
really bad feeling experiences.
sure.
And I was like, oh my gosh, like
Mm-hmm.
what am I even doing here? And so a, a lot of that feeling of like I need to finally get away was coming from just like this fear of like I don't even know what's going to happen with my life,
Yeah.
but I know
Mm-hmm.
I need to like detach from this person
Yeah.
because I'm going along with like whatever they want me to do, and I don't want to keep doing that.
Got it.
So to me it felt easier if I could do something to make him hate me,
Mm-hmm.
so that he
Yeah.
wouldn't want to reach out to me.
Right.
I needed that
Mm-hmm.
because I needed an excuse to not reach out to him.
That makes so much sense. And so it sounds like the consequences of maintaining that began to be so serious through the lens of like being a mom with a little baby, and you're like, I have got to stop this. And you were able to find a way, which I think is so hard for a lot of people, to um, stop him from like reaching back out to you. And I think a lot of people in toxic relationships, like they'll stop, they'll say, okay, I'm not going to see this person anymore, I'm not going to call them, and they'll kind of like white knuckle it. But then they get a text or they get a
Yep.
call or something. And I mean, I know that when I work with clients around this topic, it takes a long time sometimes for them to prevent someone from being able to contact them. Like, we're going to block numbers and
Mhm.
emails, but you couldn't even do that because you shared a child together, so you had to
Oh
find
yeah.
some way to keep him from like luring you back in.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we went through all of the, like blocking through
Mm-hmm.
emails, but there'd always, of course, like you said, there's a
Yeah.
child, so you have to
Right.
communicate for some reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, I was living in this state with, nothing. So I was weirdly dependent upon him. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's strange.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I mean, it's understandable, but you figured out a way to do it. But that's also another really great point, though, just that you mentioned that you were also very far away from your support system and your network, and that also, I think, um, adds vulnerability and makes it harder to extract yourself from these kinds of relationships. And I know that the circumstances were such that anyone would have done the same in that situation. But for somebody listening who doesn't have exactly that circumstance, to be sure that you're around family or supportive friends so that it's easier to pull yourself away. Yeah. Wow. And that you also mentioned that even though you, after that moment, kind of like um, came back together and then separated again, I almost in that heard, that, have you ever heard that old saying, like relapse is part of recovery? Because
Yes,
like,
right?
yeah, exactly. But so that because you stopped it, that even then when you did re-engage, you had like grown during that
Mhm.
period, and it was easier to ultimately leave. Like,
Yeah, like that
mhm,
reconnection wasn't as good. I
yeah,
don't think it was as good for either of us. It was like
hmm,
the drug, wasn't the
yeah,
same. It wasn't, providing, I think what either one of us thought that it would.
hmm,
There was even more fighting than, whatever, goodness we thought we were getting
right,
from it. So yeah,
yeah,
that definitely did make it easier.
yeah, yeah. And also, I think I heard in there the opportunity to kind of trust yourself a little bit more in the interim, that you were like, okay, I'm without him for a little while and I'm actually okay that
Mhm.
you had that experience. That's really good.
Well, and that I think that's probably one of the most important things.
Hmm.
If we don't talk about these types of experiences, we don't talk about how it happened.
Yeah.
And I know for me, it was a huge thing because I have had a lot of views about love that are those deeply ingrained
Hmm.
cultural things where I think, I need somebody else. I will never be happy
Mm.
if, I'm single, and all of these different beliefs that I had about love that kind of just ended up making me desperate about it, or
Hmm.
it made me feel like being single was going to be settling in my
Hmm.
life.
Hmm. Yeah, that is a wonderful insight that you were able to see that no, you're actually okay, and that I can be single and
You
be
can
happy and
actually be
fulfilled.
happy like as a
Yeah.
single person.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, especially for single women, it's different for single men because, single men, they get to live it up, and, the bachelor life is kind of like exalted in some ways,
Mm.
but
Mhm.
single women, it's like, no, you're a spinster, you're unwanted, you're
Oh.
a cat lady, you're, all these different things, all negative. Like being a single woman isn't really something that, our culture appreciates.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
feel like that's changing though. Like really, I
it
mean, I would
is.
say
Thank
even like
goodness,
in
right?
the last 5 years or so, and also I
Yes.
think in part to people who are in the public space like you,
Mhm.
writing about kind of a different narrative and being able to frame it in such a way as being the author of your own destiny, and that you can have a very happy and fulfilling life in that
Oh
way. I
yeah.
feel like it's starting to change.
It is,
Yeah.
people are talking about like the self partnership,
Mhm.
and I
Yeah.
like that. I like
Yeah.
those conversations a lot. I
Hmm.
didn't have those growing up. I mean, that was not an option in my life.
No. Yeah.
I really like that.
Well, I know we've been talking for a while. And I don't want to keep you all day, but I mean, this is just, it's such an important story and an important topic. Um, and if I could impose on you, I mentioned a while ago that I have so many people get in touch with me asking questions from like within this experience. And
Oh,
and I
sure.
actually had one that came through not too long ago. And if it's okay, I'll read it and then we'll
Yeah.
discuss. Okay.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of people, in addition to the writer, can probably relate to this. So um, the person writing says, my husband and I, LGBT, have been together for 6 years. I thought everything was fine. And about 6 months ago, we fell into a really rough patch, which was fine. Uh, at the time, he cheated. I tried to forgive, but everything about him changed. I didn't feel respected or even acknowledged anymore. I kicked him out. He was gone for 2 months. He's back now. We're attending marriage counseling, but I don't think we're seeing eye to eye. he goes on to say, I have expectations about what a marriage should be, and his expectations of what he wants are totally different. I'm giving him space, independence. I'm trying to gain understanding, but I feel like it's a losing battle. I feel like I'm giving it 110%, but it feels like he's half in and half out. He says he still talks to other people, and even uh, after expressing that it makes me uncomfortable for him to seem to be shopping around, he brushes it off. He mentioned wanting to be in an open relationship, but doesn't know why it's something he wants. When I do say enough is enough, and move on, wait, I think he meant to say, why don't I say enough is
Mhm.
enough and move on? I love him and I want to be with him, but I feel like we don't value the same things in a relationship or even in life. And he closes by saying, thank you. I've historically been blinded by chemistry, um, missing, ignoring red flags, ending up in toxic long-term relationships. And I want this to be different. And so, I mean, this is clearly a bit different of a situation than the one that
Sure.
you described. It sounds like there was a long-term relationship and then it started to feel emotionally unsafe for this person, but still a lot of
Mhm.
the same things. I mean, like as I read this, I read the story of someone who is bonded to what has become over the years a
Mhm.
really toxic relationship. And there are things that are happening here that don't feel good for him. He is not getting his
Mhm.
needs met. It doesn't feel emotionally safe, but he's saying, I I can't be done. And I feel like I
And
should be done.
he said that everything, he thought everything was okay. And when
Mm-hmm.
people say that, I always wonder because that was a big issue with this relationship for me. I thought that everything was okay because we weren't actually fighting. When, we were happy, I thought that we were happy, but this partner was holding on to so much resentment that I had like no idea even existed.
Mm.
And he was just using that resentment as excuses for him to keep living his cheating lifestyle. And I realized that that was, his pattern throughout all of his relationships. But
Well, actually, can I just pause for a
yeah.
second? Because this, I think, is another thing. Because you said he was holding on to resentment, like towards
Mhm.
you, and what actually, and if you look into like social psychology, whenever people behave in such a way that is harmful to others, like so somebody who's cheating or somebody who's lying or stealing, there's, and I'm sure you've heard of this, there's this concept called cognitive dissonance. And
Mhm.
so, in order for people to maintain their own sense of integrity, they must have a narrative that the other person is somehow bad or wrong or deserving of the things that
That
happened
makes
to
sense.
them. So
Yeah.
but a lot of people believe like, well,
Mhm.
he's holding on to resentment, and like, I don't think you probably ever did anything wrong. It's like he could not have done what he did if he didn't make you the bad guy a
Oh,
little bit.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I just wanted to put that out there because I think that's also an important
That's a good
idea
point.
for a
Yeah.
lot of people who are in this. It's like oh well, if I had been better or if I hadn't done
Oh, yeah,
XYZ, then they
no.
wouldn't have done this, because that's the story in the relationship. It's
That's
like,
what
well,
we
I'm only
think.
cheating
Yeah.
on you because you're horrible or whatever. But so we're hearing this in this person's
Mhm.
story too, is that he's kind of being blamed in some
Mhm.
ways, and he's like taking that on a little bit
Right. And if the
from his
connection was
partner. Hmm.
healthy, that partner would be speaking up and saying that
Yeah.
something was wrong. And
Yeah.
just like, with mine, like I said, I had said to my ex, like,
Hmm.
why wouldn't you tell me? Like, why would you just suddenly one day, be like,
Right.
I'm happy, I'm leaving you, we're having a baby, but oh well. Like,
Yeah.
that you're not happy like way before. So why
Hmm.
wouldn't you speak up about that? I
Hmm.
can't read your mind. And I think about that when I hear that if they
Yeah.
thought that their relationship was going so good and then all of a sudden they hit this rough patch that they didn't see and their partner cheats, like what has their partner not been expressing?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's not an honest relationship.
It really isn't. Yeah. And I think that that is good advice for this person, is that to have a more maybe reality based understanding of what's happening is that you're in a relationship with someone who doesn't communicate, who cheats, and who does not have the same kind of values and ideas about marriage that you want. And is it a good idea to continue this?
That's
Yeah,
so hard
it's
because
hard.
I think too, like those of us who get caught up
Mm-hmm.
in toxic relationships, we tend to have that, like love conquers all
Yeah.
belief and
Mm-hmm.
the very like forgiving. I
Mm-hmm.
know like in my history, I've forgiven people for cheating when I never expected that I would. I thought that cheating would be the deal
Oh,
breaker.
it's not for most
Right.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then it makes me like have no boundaries. Like I will let them get away with anything as
Mm.
long as, there's that promise of like, oh, we'll get through it.
Yeah.
But then I'm not, like you said, that I'm not having that reality based relationship
Mm-hmm.
because I'm trying to live out the love that I want, but it's not the
Yeah.
love that's actually there.
What a beautiful way to say that. Trying to live out the love that I want rather than the love that is actually there. And that is not a Shannon thing either. I mean, then there's also
Right.
research around this. Everybody says, oh, if they cheated, I
Mm-hmm.
would leave. But what we know from research is that when cheating happens, they're like, well, next time you cheat. You know what I mean? That there's this
Exactly.
hope that it would be different. And so I think maybe with this person, and I think what I heard in your story and what I experienced in my story is that really what will ultimately set you free is letting go of the belief that it is ever going to be different.
Yeah.
That's a hard one.
That's the worst.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Any other thoughts for this person who's currently feeling so stuck?
I think there's this idea too that we're being selfish when we think of ourselves,
Mm,
in a relationship,
mm-hmm.
but it's different, when you're in a toxic one,
Yeah.
you have to kind of be a little bit selfish and you have to start thinking about what's actually going to help you grow
Mm-hmm.
and become the kind of person who isn't, you know, going to want a toxic relationship or like settle for something that is hurting you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be a good time if you're putting in all of the effort
Mm-hmm.
in the relationship and you're not, getting their effort in return, or they're, continuing to look for other partners and things,
Yeah.
then I think it's time to, do more self-focus
Mm-hmm.
on your own needs instead of all of the we needs.
That is great advice. That is really great advice to think about, you and what you need and what you want for your life, and to be making decisions that way. And then I'll also add from my perspective and walking with people who ultimately do, what will happen even in a toxic relationship, and sometimes even more intensely in a toxic relationship, whenever you like pull the plug and say, okay, I'm done, and you move to separate or leave, you will feel overwhelmingly intense feelings of grief, pain, fear, loss. And this is normal and expected. It's akin to withdrawal symptoms, and it does not mean that this is love and that you should actually be with this person. This is always what happens. And I think that those feelings again can be very confusing, and it's like, if I'm feeling these, I should get back together with them so
Mm-hmm.
that this pain stops, right? And to kind of shift into a different way of thinking about it is that no, this is when we need to use all of those good skills and be able to breathe through it and
Oh
exist in
yeah.
this discomfort, and not, again, going back to, I think,
Mm-hmm.
that drug metaphor, like, yes, when you stop using heroin, you will have overwhelmingly intense feelings of craving and you will feel terrible. Does not mean you should start using heroin again. It means we need to like move
It's
through.
true.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get to that point where you realize that good love isn't about like some emotional high all the time.
good love isn't
Because,
about an emotional high all the time.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a secret, I think, that a lot of people, it takes a long time, but that
Mhm.
actual real love, it doesn't really feel like emotional highs at
Right?
all. It's like much more sort of calm and peaceful
Mhm.
and like secure. And yeah.
There's another writer on Medium, Chris Gage, and she writes a lot
Mhm.
about how good love is boring. And I think, I mean, I think she's probably right, because it's the stuff that's without all of that drama
Mhm.
and all of the like, oh, does he love me? Does he love me? Like just like
Yeah,
that frantic thing that we get ourselves into. Like that's
totally.
not the real thing.
Right. That frantic anxiety and
Mhm.
pain and fear and doubt and highs and lows. It's
Yes.
not actually what
But that's
healthy
what
love
we
feels
think
like.
love is, just because, like you said, that's that cultural
Mm-hmm.
thing that's ingrained in us so deeply.
Mm. Well, and Shannon, you and I
Mhm.
today are warriors fighting against those cultural ideas through this conversation. And so, again,
Yes.
I'm so glad that you were able to join me today and that we had the opportunity to talk about this in such an authentic way, because I
Mhm.
think that it's that these are the kinds of ideas and messages that especially I think for young people, need to
Mhm.
be hearing so that they, yeah, can have different experiences, hopefully. Thank you so much for joining me today. This
Oh,
has
thank
been
you.
a wonderful conversation. Do you have any last thoughts or words of advice for listeners who might be entangled in toxic relationships, or have we said all there
Um,
is to say?
it's hard, but I think for me the most important lesson has been understanding like that why. For
Mm,
me, like, why do I think that love looks a certain way? And then
mm,
realizing just that I had a really big fixation on everything our culture tells us about love and fairy
yeah.
tales and all of that.
Hmm.
And I think once you kind of break that spell over your life, it's like, oh, like you're free to be happy and like pursue your own life in a healthy way.
Yeah. Wonderful. What a beautiful just idea to end on. So thank you again so much for spending this time with me today. And anyone who is interested in learning more about Shannon Ashley or reading so many just insightful and entertaining articles on life and love and stuff, you can find her work at Shannon.Ashley at Medium. Is that it?
Actually just go to medium.com and just type in my name, Shannon Ashley.
Okay.
Yep. And I'll pop
Wonderful.
up. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again. This has been a lot
Yeah.
of fun.
Thank you.
Oh, well, and that's